Can you imagine your entire country just going dark all at once? Well, that's exactly what happened in Cuba. A massive power outage plunged millions of people into darkness, and it points to a crisis that's incredibly deep and complex. All right, let's get into it and unpack what went wrong.
This quote from someone living there, wow, it just really brings it all home, doesn't it? This isn't just about the lights being out. It's about being completely cut off, isolated, as all the basic things you count on just stop. So let's start with the people on the ground, the real human impact. We're not talking about a small, localized blackout here. This thing swept across almost the entire island, from the capital, Havana, all the way to the eastern provinces. And it wasn't just lights. It knocked out radio and TV signals, too. Total communications blackout. And the fallout, it just ripples into every single part of daily life. You've got these hours-long power cuts in that intense Caribbean heat. Of course, that means food in the fridge goes bad. Water supplies get disrupted. It got so bad the government actually had to start rationing essential services. It's just this cascade of one problem after another. So the big question is, how does an entire country lose power all at once? Well, a lot of the time, it starts with just one single point of failure. And that was the technical trigger that kicked off this massive nationwide chain reaction. So here's the culprit. The whole thing started with a failure at the Antonio Guterres thermal electricity plant. Now, this isn't just any old power plant. It's one of the biggest and most critical electricity producers in the entire country. When it failed, it was like the first giant domino falling over.
And this is how that domino effect played out. First, that key plant goes down. The national grid, which is already super fragile, just can't handle losing that much power so suddenly. It gets completely unstable, and that instability shoots through the system like a shockwave, causing the whole thing to collapse from west to east.
But here's the thing. That plant failure, that was just the trigger. It wasn't the real root cause. The real question is, why was the grid so fragile to begin with? And that brings us to what is basically a perfect storm of underlying problems. You've got this trifecta of vulnerabilities creating that perfect storm. Cuba's power plants, they run on imported oil, but there's a huge fuel shortage. On top of that, the infrastructure itself is really old, decades old, so it breaks down all the time. And then, making everything worse, are U.S. sanctions, which make getting that fuel they desperately need incredibly difficult. Just to be clear on what we're talking about, a thermoelectric plant basically just burns fuel, and in Cuba's case, that's oil, to create the heat that generates electricity. The bottom line is simple. If you don't have oil, you don't have power. The whole system is completely dependent on it. So let's zoom out a bit and really hone in on that fuel problem. This energy crisis isn't just a technical issue. It's deeply tied up in international politics. It's an oil chokehold, and it has some major geopolitical roots. And when you look at where Cuba's oil comes from, the problem becomes crystal clear. Venezuela, which is their main supplier, hasn't sent any oil since December. At the same time, Mexico had to stop its supplies because the U.S. threatened tariffs on anyone sending fuel to Cuba. So from multiple directions, the taps have just been turned off. Now, for its part, the Cuban government points the finger for its economic crisis and these fuel shortages directly at the decades-long economic sanctions from the United States. From their perspective, that is the absolute root of the problem. And all of this brings us to the bigger picture here. This massive blackout wasn't some freak accident. It's really a symptom of a much larger ongoing crisis that's been building and building for years. Let's take a look at how this fits into a bigger pattern. You can really see how things have been escalating. For decades, sanctions have been squeezing the economy. Then, in just the last few years, major blackouts were already becoming a thing. But since those Venezuelan oil shipments stopped, and especially since the start of 2024, these nationwide outages have turned into a recurring nightmare for everyone there. And that leaves us with this huge, fundamental question about Cuba's future. The country is stuck between a rock and a hard place. Its own aging, fragile grid on one side, and this immense external pressure cutting off its fuel supply on the other. The challenge is so much bigger than just fixing one power plant, and it leaves this critical question just hanging in the air. What's the long-term solution to keep the lights on?